this sets on top of that?
Yeah, so it just makes it thicker.
Huh.
But it's a hard drive.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I assume so. But I don't know if we're supposed to start on time or not.
You know, it looks like people are starting, I think they kind of drifted off out of lunch.
Okay.
And then they didn't drift here, they, you know.
Did somebody hit the bells?
Yeah, they're going around and
All right.
Yeah, so
Well, let's wait a couple of minutes.
And I wanted to make sure it's not too much. Oh, Ed coming, nice to meet you. Thanks for helping us.
I'm happy to wait a few minutes because I have to check into my flight in 2.5 minutes.
Instead of stopping the presentation.
Oh, really? Are you leaving this afternoon?
No. It's I want to check in 24 hours ahead of time. I'm leaving tomorrow. But they won't let me check in until 24 hours.
Oh, okay.
The flight's tomorrow at 1:35.
So we'll be holding people outside the door until give you like
That's fine. I need 2 minutes.
Greg, I think we're on the same flight.
Is that right?
I'm flying through Dulles to get home. So
No, I'm going to the BWI.
all right, so we're on the same flight.
But I got to check in early because I have to have an aisle seat. Can't stand being on a 5.5-hour flight and be stuck in the middle. Okay. Interesting.
Hi.
See what their server times is. Still too early.
Greg, you checked in yet?
No. That's all right. We can start.
So Bill can go first. And then we can get
All I have to do is push one button on here.
All right. So I think we should get going because it's you know, I think my guess is people will keep drifting in.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
All right. Hello, everybody. We're going to talk about project management and how marketing should work with IT and how you can get a project going. And I wanted to ask, how many of you think you know how a bicycle works, what a bicycle looks like? All right. So I asked a couple people to draw pictures of bicycles for me. Here are the two pictures. Now, could you imagine taking, these look like bicycles, and you see that and you know it's a bicycle, right? But could you imagine taking either of these drawings to an engineer and say, build that for me? Right? No, I mean, there's no spokes on the wheel on this bike. If you look through you have no idea that the wheel turns. There's so many things about it that is completely inadequate. It conveys bicycle if you know what a bicycle is. But if you don't know what a bicycle is, it's pretty much useless. And a big part of the problem with, excuse me a second. A big part of the problem that marketing has dealing with IT is marketing is speaking in very high-level language. They're trying to speak about a project at a level that IT isn't understanding. IT wants a requirements document. They want the specs, and they don't get it. So the problem is that marketing and IT are looking at issues in very different ways. And what I'm going to suggest is that marketing people need to become more tech savvy and think a little bit about what's different between their perspective and the IT perspective and what they need to learn to make it work. So marketing, if you sit in on any of the marketing sessions, people are saying, how do you do this, how do you do that? And the answer is always, I don't know, test it, right? Try a picture here, try a picture there, try a yellow envelope, try a blue envelope, everything is test it and see what works. Well, that's totally antithetical to the way IT wants to work. They want to design and build a system that's going to work for a decade. They don't want to be changing it all the time and moving things around. So, you know the saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail, right? Well, the IT department, their main tool is the computer. And what does a computer do? A computer does a million things the same way, very quickly, very well. But what marketing wants to do is do one thing, a million different things one time, right? Try a bunch of things, and that's part of the inherent conflict here. So IT wants to automate, they want to use templates, they want to build something once that will run as an ongoing thing. And marketing wants to say, well, we don't know if we really want this image over here all the time, or if we always want the navigation over here, or if we want that. And that creates a big conflict. So marketing looks at answers. They don't look at things as a system that will exist to be used again and again. And that's the way IT looks at it. They want to say, I want to design this so it's done. I might have to tweak it for little things, but I don't have to keep recreating it and redesigning it over and over again. And there are practical reasons for that, because when you're building a database, you don't want to 6 months down the line realize, oh, we need this other table, or we need to add these other fields. So they want stability. They want something that's repeatable. For marketing, doing the same thing again means you didn't learn anything the first time. So marketing wants to try something different every time. IT wants to have predictable, manageable change. And marketing wants to come to a conference and come back with a bunch of ideas and say, do this, right? So those are the problems. Now, I don't know if you read recently, some of the brain science people say that this whole left brain, right brain thing is wrong, that it's really more front brain, back brain, okay? But you know what I mean when I say left brain, right brain. People are more intuitive or people are more analytical, right? Well, a big part of the problem is the marketing people are the intuitive people and the IT people are the analytical people. So also the two different groups have very different priorities. IT has a priority of, for one thing, they think of themselves as, we're IT, we have our own rules, everybody else has to do things our way. You have to submit a requirements document, you have to go through the help desk, you have to submit things this way. They have their own little empire. And the IT has a special relationship in the company in that a lot of times they have pull with the CEO. If IT goes to the CEO and says, if I do this, it's going to expose all this data and you're going to be sued and we're going to have PCI problems. They have a back door to get their way, which is there's a lot of money at stake if IT screws up. So they have very different business requirements and responsibilities. Now, marketing tends to have firm deadlines. Mailing has to go out at a certain time. They're not always completely firm, but you usually have something has to be done. IT is notoriously late. You try to get something done and it gets pushed back and it gets pushed back because the project there's mission creep. It starts off as this very clear, discernible thing, and then it becomes a different project as things move along. So one of the tricks, one of the keys for IT working with marketing is to set up clear deliverables and a schedule ahead of time. It won't work, but try it. Set up the clear schedule. Now, the programmer is thinking, when the marketing person comes along and says, I want this system that takes these email addresses and puts them over here and sends this and does that, the IT person is thinking, okay, how does that work with this other system? How is that data going to get from here to there? How am I going to make sure I don't have duplicates? How do I make sure that I don't have a bunch of different records that can't all go into the same database, right? So they're thinking about it in a very systematic way. What server resources, how often do I have to update? Does this create security problems? Am I going to be exposing something by doing this? That's what they're thinking. Marketing is just thinking, I just want to collect this person's email address, right? Now, the marketer is thinking, I want to do this. I want to do it quickly so I can test it. I want to test it, find out if it works, and then move on. The marketer is thinking, how do I measure success? Now, I forgot to add something early on. Part of the problem with marketing communicating with IT sometimes is just a matter of terminology. Like if I were to say source code in a marketing context, people would say, oh, that's the source of the order, right? That's the order came from print or this email campaign or whatever. You say source code to an IT person, it means something completely different. So you can have the IT guy say, oh, we have the source codes all taken care of, don't worry about that. And they don't, because they don't know which source code you're talking about. But the same problem comes up with measuring what you're doing and how you're doing it. How do I know if this worked? IT has a totally different perspective on measuring things. What they're measuring is server time, and is this page going to load quickly, and does it fit with everything else? They're not measuring, did I get a lot of signups, right? Very different perspective. And marketing is interested in, okay, I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work, how do I change it? All right, so what marketing needs to do is basically you need to become a marketing technologist. You need to understand as much of the technology as you can so that you can communicate with the IT guys. You have to understand what motivates them and why. Why are they doing things that way? It's usually not they're just trying to be a pain. They usually have some reason that they have a process and they want to work through the process because that's the way things work in a programming environment. So what you need to do is bring them in early in the process and work with them. And basically you should get them, when you're first thinking about the idea, get them in and let them think about it. I've often thought there are two kinds of programmers. There are yes programmers and no programmers. The yes programmer, you say, can you do this? And he says, absolutely. And then later on you find out, well, they can't really do it the way you want, and there's this limitation, and you got to do this other thing. Then there are no programmers. You go to them and say, can you do this? And they say, absolutely not. We can't possibly do that. And then they think about it for a little while, and they come back and say, but I could do this, all right? Well, the idea is with either one of those groups, get them thinking about the project early and find out what the limitations are and why. Maybe one of your requirements really isn't that important, and you're willing to work around it, try something else. So bring them in early. Model the project with commercially available services. Now, I've heard this kind of conversation in a business environment where somebody wants to add a particular feature to their big website. And the IT department says, we can't do that, it would take this, it would take this, it would take this. And the person says, I could do it in 5 minutes on WordPress, which is true. You could do it in 5 minutes on WordPress. But it doesn't integrate with anything else. It doesn't fit in with your system. The orders don't go in the right place. Nothing is going to work right together. However, given that, it's still a good idea, when you can, to model the concept with something that you are familiar with and you can work with, so you get an idea of what it is you're talking about. But be willing to give on the when IT says something can't be done. Everything can be done. It's a question of is this a 1 week problem? Is this a 1 month problem? Is this a 1 year problem? Find out what the big problems are and work around those. Find another way to answer it. All right. So marketing needs to learn about technology and find out how they work with IT. I've found that once you're working with technical people and you show that you actually know a little bit about the technology, it eases things tremendously. Because the IT people are thinking that the marketing guys are flakes, and the marketing guys are thinking that the IT guys are just stick in the mud who don't want to do anything. But if you get some communication going and you can find out what their reasons are, it makes working together a whole lot easier. So another thing is, we talk about that left brain, right brain thing, which is not true, but it's a convenient model, right? The marketing guys are the intuitive guys. Don't count on the IT guys to come up with solutions. Some of them are very good at that. Some IT guys are great. You give them a problem, they'll think about it, they'll come up with a solution. Some of the IT guys have Asperger's syndrome, and they want to sit in a corner and they want to work on their computer, and they don't want to think about anything different. So don't rely on them to come up with the solutions. Talk through the issues with them, and you be the one who's trying to be creative. But listen to them about how the system works and what the problems are. I'm not reading the slides. You can get the slides from the afterwards. Is that right, Ed? They can download all the slides later? Yeah, okay. So there are certain things that you need to know, certain basic things. You need to know the difference between the server side and the client side, what that means, what it means for something to run on the client side versus what it means for something to run on the server side. You need to understand why a template is helpful for the IT guys. What's a cache? What's a database? Why is it a problem to change a database midstream? You need to understand some basic things about how things work for the IT guys, and you also need to get a sense of how what you're going to do is going to affect the metrics they work under, like server uptime and how well the servers are going to run. All right. So you should also know basic things about HTML and style sheets. You don't have to be an HTML pro, but you should know what's going on and how it works. Because a lot of times people don't realize that the IT guy wants to have a style sheet for the whole site. And that one style sheet's going to govern everything that goes everywhere. Well, if you then say, on this page I want this to be yellow and this to be blue, then that confuses them. So understand the basics of how this stuff works, and it's a whole lot easier to communicate. All right, you should know how cookies work, what they do. You should know web-based analytic tools like Google Analytics or something like that. Just understand the basics of how it's working. Read a little bit about email, what some of these terms mean, MX records and SPF and sender ID and all this stuff. Just understand the basics. Just go to Wikipedia and read the entries on these things, or skim it, and you'll have enough. You'll have enough to go by. All right. So there's a huge culture gap that you're going to have to deal with. And things that work in sales and marketing, I'm going to light a fire. That's not necessarily going to work with IT. They're just a different type. They're a different type of workers. It's a different type of environment. And what works to motivate sales guys doesn't work to motivate programmers. They're just different. For example, I don't like to communicate with people by email when I can just walk down and talk to them in person. But a lot of people, it's really better to communicate with them by email. For one, there's a record. Two, that's just the way they organize their workday. If you just talk with them in the hallway, they might not remember. So you're going to have to get to know the guys and find out how things get in their queue, how they work best, how they put it on their calendar, how they prioritize their daily tasks. So sometimes an email is better than talking to them face to face. All right, now IT usually is going to say, you come along and you say, I want this new thing that's going to do X, Y, and Z. And they're going to say, write me a requirements document. That's almost the immediate response. Give me a requirements document. Well, you need a requirements document, but before you do that, talk about it in general terms. Find out what the big barriers are. Find out what their concerns are. Work around those things so that you get a sense of what the project is. And then make the requirements document more of an iterative process. Because if you just go and you get the marketing people together and they sit down, what do we want? And they come up with these crazy things and they hand them in. What's going to happen is there are going to be two things on your list that you thought were kind of nice to have. They're not really crucial. And the IT guys are looking at that going, oh my gosh, it's going to take 6 months to do that. And if you don't find out, okay, these are the big problems. These are the things we can do very easily, and these are the things that are going to take forever. And work that into your expectations and your process, you're going to have trouble later on. So write me a requirements document is not go away, you're bothering me. It's just the way they think. They want to know these are the specs I have to write to, because that's the way they program. So the help desk is not designed to be a stop. It's just designed to systematize things and help them prioritize their work. All right, now, some guys are perfectionists, and they want everything to be absolutely pristine. And some guys are good enough guys. They'll just kind of slap something together, and then, oh yeah, it's a problem, and they'll go back and fix it. It's really difficult to work with that. If you are launching some system, and the CEO is really behind this, and he wants this thing to work, And the IT guy's expectation is, well, we'll launch it and then we'll fix it later, like healthcare.gov, for example. You don't want that environment. You want to make sure that you know ahead of time, is this guy a get it perfect before it launches, or is this guy a this is good enough and we'll fix it later, or some mixture of the two? And I think probably the best way to get a sense of that is to work on some small projects first to see how working with these guys works. However, IT does have somewhat of a tendency to over-engineer things. They try to do more than really has to be done. I used to work with this guy who thought that the essence of a good systems guy was to design things that people didn't have to do this work anymore. So if I had some project that you could do manually in a half an hour, and it had to be done once a quarter, okay? So somebody has to take a half an hour of their time to do this manually once a quarter. No big deal. This guy would take 5 hours to write a program to do that thing. It's just totally not worth the expenditure, right? So sometimes they're going to over-engineer something that really you can just handle another way. It's not a problem. All right, so the basic thing that drives IT people crazy is they think you're a flake. They think you're flying around from here to there. You're saying, I want this, no, I want that. You're saying, I want it to do this thing, and you don't need to understand how that works. So they don't want half-baked ideas. They don't want you to come to them, oh, we've been planning this in the marketing department for 3 months, so this has to be up tomorrow. That happens a lot. You want to avoid that stuff. And the crucial thing to avoid that is to bring them in early and get their feedback on the project. Also don't like non-critical requirements, things that just don't really matter, that you're making a requirement that they have to do. Make sure that you're kind of ranking the things on your to-do list as, do I really have to have this, or is this just nice to have? All right. So don't change the project in the middle as much as possible. There's this thing called agile programming where they try to get around this problem, where they think that by using this different method that you can get around the problem of moving things in the middle. I'm not sure it really works. The problem there is not one of method as much as it is of personalities and working with people. You need to, if sometimes the project is going to change in the middle, you just need somebody who can deal with that, or a process where you can get through that. All right, so Kate Mayfield had this quote, get your IT involved right at the beginning, or it's your fault if they become blockers later. And that's really what it comes down to. If you don't get their input early on, and then you say, why isn't this done? And they say, well, because what you're asking us to do simply can't be done with the infrastructure that we have. So if you didn't learn that early on, if you didn't find out what the possible problems were going to be, then it is your fault if they're going to be trying to resist you down the road. So I've come up with what I think is a process to do this. You have a bare bones checklist for the project. IT reviews the checklist, and they meet with marketing for clarification about what this means. Marketing provides wireframes. They can just be drawings on a piece of paper of what you think this thing should look like. IT responds with, here's what we think you're asking for. And then marketing buys in, or you go through this process again. So here's a sample bare bones checklist. The elevator pitch. Very briefly, what is this about? Why are we doing it? How big is this project? We used to have a guy who would get really upset. He would say, you guys are going to make us do all this work, and we're going to do one thing, we're going to get one customer. And then we're going to do this other, it's just not worth their effort to go to all this work to do your one little project. Give them an idea of, is this something that's only for one campaign, or one time, or is this something you're going to use for 6 months or for a year? What do you hope to get out of it? They're not as directly responsible for revenue as you are, but they still have a sense of, I want to be doing things that are helping the company move forward. So respect them on that point and help them understand what the return for this project would be. You have to have a timeline, and you have to have the other drivers factor. The CEO really wants this. That trumps other things. Or it's just, we have to do it because we have to do this to meet the requirements of this other vendor, and this other vendor covers all these other processes that we do and all this money. Give them a sense of what the big picture is. All right, Do-it-yourself can be a bad idea, but it can also be a way for you to understand how things work and what it is you're really trying to get to. All right. Sometimes there are situations where you're doing a one-off project that doesn't have to integrate with everything else, where you should bypass IT, make your own little thing in WordPress or whatever you want to do, get it done and get it out of the way. But be clear with them up front. You're going to tell them, this doesn't have to integrate with any of your systems. We're just going to do this once. All we want to do is collect this data and be done. We don't see any reason why we have to involve the big system here and make a big integration. So make sure that's clear, and then fine. Hire somebody to make a WordPress template for you and move on and be done. All right, IT can always say that this isn't secure. They can always appeal to the fact that they have all these requirements with PCIS and PCI compliance and all this other kind of stuff. So they can always pull that on you, and beware of that. Marketing has a different trump card, which is that the success of the company depends on you selling the product. So you can pull that out. If we don't work together, we're not going to get sales. There won't be any revenue. Okay. Sorry, I tried to go through all that very quickly, but I'm pretty much on time. So now it's Bill's turn.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm Bill Springer from Diversified Communications, and my responsibility at our company is I'm responsible for the IT operation as well as a handful of our events. So this really has been sort of the story of my life over the past few years, that one day I'm wearing one hat, the next day I'm wearing another hat, and get a little confused. But it is very truly two different worlds. What I want to do is add color commentary to what Greg did, take you through a couple of projects that we did and where the success, pitfalls, and that kind of thing. I know that storytelling is a good way to present information. I don't know if I'm such a good storyteller that you'll have an emotional connection to success of an IT project, but I'm going to try. First, if you will, let me just talk about Diversify a little bit to give you some context. SIPA is something new to us. This is my first time here. We, in April, acquired a company that was a member here called the Institute of Finance and Management. Recently, we acquired another company called Financial Operations Network that is also in the same accounting space. So we're trying to learn something new, and this morning I've learned enough to make me feel a little nauseous about how far behind we are. So we have a lot of work to do. When we do large trade shows, we do them all around the world. At a meeting like this, of trade show organizers, they talk about data in the same way, but then they don't really do very much with it, because it's all about the exhibitors and getting the bodies on the show floor. To be honest, is not the hardest thing in the world. And when you have 20,000 people coming to a show, they come, they go. You don't need to know everyone by name. With this kind of business, obviously the revenue is much more dependent on the members, the attendees, that kind of thing. So I'm learning a lot that our systems may need some updating. As I said, we have trade shows, conferences. We have a small number of magazines and some fledgling e-media products. Our largest categories that we're in are the seafood industry, the commercial marine industry, which we define as tugboats, barges, ferry boats, inner harbor traffic, other food shows. If you have any interest in any of those categories, you can come talk to me. Sometimes people's eyes glaze over, but we've done very well with them. We're based in Portland, Maine, and we have offices in Canada, UK, and Australia. And we're 175 people in Portland, and we're about 700 around the world. So we're a decent-sized company, but new again to this group. So I want to tell you a tale of two projects. They're not that different, so listen closely when I talk about them. One worked, one didn't work. I still have faith, but I think I learned a lot as an IT. I'm from the product side. I'm from a marketing background, publishing background, so IT was something new, and I think I learned some lessons in how these projects came about, so I'll try to share that with you. Again, a little sidebar if I can. This is something that Greg talked about, and it's something I talk about a lot internally, that IT is, we understand that putting computers, giving everybody computers and having the system run is not the challenge it used to be. Computers work. They work great. They don't break. People know how to use Microsoft Office. They know how to use the web. We're not in the business of corralling everybody's technology concerns and you know, making sure that things run on time. We need, as an IT organization, we need to add value and quick. The value, anybody can put together an IT organization now, and especially in the last couple of years with Amazon Web Services and Google Drive, et cetera, it's a very simple thing to build an infrastructure. So we are, as an IT group, we know that like the clock's ticking on what we used to do, and we have to add more value. At the same time, users have, this is all much easier now, so users have to own it. They have to, they can't throw their hands up and say, I just want it to work all the time. It's easy, but it's not that easy. Everybody's different, everyone's style is different, everyone's business is different. You have to, as Greg said, you have to learn enough to be an educated employee. It makes me crazy when people call the help desk to say, how do I do a mail merge? When it really hasn't changed how you do a mail merge in 10 years. But they just don't want to take the time to learn it. So we have re-engineered our help desk to really be someone who says you should use Google and YouTube. That's our answer a lot. And it's not very popular, and it's become a little more popular over the last year or so. But you'll get much better answers. You'll be able to hone in on really what you need. We're trying to explain it to a help desk, someone who answers the help desk phone, he's got a lot, he or she has a lot on their mind. They have, you know, they just can't sit there and do just-in-time training. So I say that a lot. I hope I've added more people to my speech, so that people have heard my opinion on that. Now, to get back to the story. Will you pass me the water?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. IT, I know I said a few minutes ago, IT, that things worked really well. Well, our key systems were unreliable. This is going back 5 years, where you would sell, you know, we sell a lot of booths. That's essentially what it's all about. You sell a booth, and then you find out that the invoice went to the wrong address, or a new contact at the company who's buying the booth. Well, next time you send an email, it went to the old guy. I mean, there was just too many places that the data was inconsistent. We couldn't get good sales reports. The salespeople couldn't get good call lists. I mean, it was really as bad as it sounds. And people had to go to 17 different places to make sure things were up to date. So you know, every time you do a manual change, something's going to go wrong. So we had plenty of places things went wrong, and plenty of things did. So that was the problem we were struggling with when the story begins, let's say. Now we fixed the problem, and this is something I think I've heard in 3 sessions. I've heard about a data warehouse. We call it an operational data store. I think everybody's aware with the idea of bringing everything together. You know, we had registration lists, we had exhibitor lists, we had web lists, we had magazine subscriptions. 25 different data streams. I can't name them all, but this is not an audience that doesn't understand what I'm talking about. We made it so you could get a profile of any attendee or exhibitor, a history of what they bought from us. Have they grown in size with their exhibit? Do they come to the show 1 year and not come to the other show? All that data was accessible. Let me take it back. It was not accessible, but it was all in one place. And you could make changes to it all in one place. They did that, as I said, the systems weren't working. That was really the driver, and I'm glad we did it, because there were marketing applications. Marketing applications were a lower priority. Our marketers had, well, I'll get to that, but they had their own problems. They couldn't, because of this data issue, they couldn't pull lists quickly, and the lists had to be simple. The queries had to be simple. Definition in our business of a complex query is: did somebody go to the Boston Seafood Show? I want a list of people who went to the Boston Seafood Show in 2010, 2011, and they skipped 2012. I want to send them a special message that they should come back. 5 years ago, that would have ground the operation to a halt. That we were unable to say yes, yes, no. We could say yes, yes, yes. We could say no, no, no. But we couldn't, if they changed their mind, it disappeared. And you know, Greg talked about how sometimes IT makes a decision, they don't quite know. If it's not explained properly, then they build a structure that makes something that sounds simple difficult. That's what happened. I won't go into all the details, but we had 3 different lists, and you couldn't do it, or you had to do it by hand. You had to pull the 2 yeses and a no and merge it by hand, which wasn't a very productive way to do it. We had all this data, it was in one place, it was organized, and there were people in the tech team that could access it, but it wasn't in a way that we could look at and say, oh, here's an opportunity, or this group is underserved, or how can we make some money off this group that we're not making now? That was out of the question as far as where we were in the world. So sales and marketing heard about this great thing, but they couldn't get at it. And they were still using old systems and old processes to get pretty good data. So IT says, wait, we can save the day here. And this is where it kind of falls apart. We can create a single version of the truth, which is a term we use a lot at Diversified, that we know for a fact that our, let's say, 31% of our subscribers to Seafood Business Magazine went to our trade show last year. Prior to this project, we could say, well, I think it's 80%. Well, really, I think it's 20%. And we could argue it all day long. We could debate. And it would depend on what your objective was, what side you would take. But we really didn't know. Or we'd have an exhibitor say, this happened all the time. An exhibitor would say, I'm tired of your show. It's the same people every year. We could tell him, as a fact, that the retention rate was 27%. So 73% of the people were new from the year before. That we all were kind of surprised by that. But if you think about it, you go to a trade show with 20,000 people, you're not going to meet them all. In fact, you're probably going to go to see the people you know. And so, of course, it's the same people every year. You choose to see the same people every year. You're going to think it's the same people. So that, there were things that we were learning. We can merge duplicate records. I'm sure we all deal with that. And that's another thing. It's harder than it sounds. And we could let the users query the data and find out. So that was IT sort of sat down and said, we're going to add value. Remember earlier I said it, IT is a commodity, they have to add value. This was the plan. 2 great projects emerged. Now these projects sound the same, so bear with me. We have a centralized marketing team that collects and analyzes large data sets. So they will be the ones that would say the retention rate was 21%. They're looking at 20,000 people here, 20,000 people here. They can do that analysis. Over all our shows, we have 17 shows around the country and overseas. So there's like a lot of work that they could do. But the salespeople, they don't want that. They want, our exhibit data is much smaller. They have a much more intimate relationship with those people. They want to take some small data and sort of learn something. I'll give you an example in a minute. So project 1 is the data analysis. And you talk about the 2 different personalities that Greg was talking about. The marketing analysts and the IT people were different, but on the spectrum, they were closer. And so they all agreed that we want to do future marketing based on past results. They want to make these were reasonable goals that everyone understood. The scope was understood. The duration was understood. The customers of the project were thinking along the same lines. There were some conflicts. What Greg captured was happened quite a bit, but it wasn't insurmountable because it's not a lot of creative. I shouldn't say that. The creativity is more based on the data than on colors or design or things that are a little harder to get your arms around. So we were feeling good about that, and it was great. It was great. They understood the technology, the complexity of the project, scope, and we had a project manager. That's something else that didn't come up. That is, when you have projects of complexity and magnitude, someone whose sole responsibility is to keep everyone on track. That's not IT, not marketing, but says, marketing, you have to do this by this date or it's not going to work. IT, you got to stay on schedule. Someone who's sort of an independent voice, keeping things on time and on target as far as the scope is very important. So it turned out well. We now can plan our projects a year in advance. We do an annual annual marketing plan, which we never did before. Those complex queries I talked about, it's a thing of the past. The whole organization was sort of breathe a sigh of relief that with some planning, a show is obviously an annual thing. 6 weeks after the show, we pretty much knew how the year was going to go from a marketing perspective. And that was not how it was before. And it had a big impact. I would say IT didn't get all the credit they should, but that happens. Now, Project 2 was this query tool for the exhibit salespeople. We wanted allow salespeople to learn more about our customers. Say, I want to be able to see quickly that we have shows that are related. We have a seafood show in Europe, a seafood show in Asia, and a seafood show in Boston. Wouldn't it be great to know if someone was at all 3 shows, or was only exhibited at 2 shows, not the 3rd? I thought, of course they wanted. This was I'm like 100% was the face of this idea. And the example that I always used that I thought would make this thing take off was, we have companies that would exhibit for 2 or 3 years, 2008, 2009, 2010. Then suddenly they never want to come back. And they never return your call. You never really understand what's going on. And it happens. People are out of the market. We certainly are some of our shows, people come in and out of. It happens. Or they go out of business, or they merge, or lots of reasons why people don't come to shows. But what we never were able to find out is if these people would attend the show in the future. Our registration data was never connected to our exhibitor data. So you have company, the Acme company, they walk away from their exhibits, but it turns out they send 6 people the next 3 years. Like, there's something going on there. There's a conversation you can have about the benefit of exhibiting versus attending. I don't know if you, in your conferences, but we have very strong opinions about companies that are marketing to the attendees that don't exhibit. We feel that's a crime against nature. And if you are doing that, we can't stop you, but we can tell you there's compelling reasons why buying a booth is a better way to achieve your goals than just walking around randomly, hoping you bump into people. So I thought that's it. That's like a perfect example of why people should use this tool. Apparently it's not so great. That the salespeople kind of know, it's like, they have a lot in their heads, especially with our salespeople. They've been there a long time. These markets aren't rapidly developing. The seafood industry today, it's not that different than the seafood industry 5,000 years ago. I mean, you catch the fish, you sell the fish. So it's not a tremendously dynamic. And these salespeople have been doing it for 15 years. They kind of know what's going on. So I saw the value, not so much. Rank their sales products at efficient calls, just it's not on there. Well, I'll tell you, not a win. I assume, when I say we, I mean I assume they would see the benefit. Frankly, they weren't interested in technology. I mean, they had to use a different tool to do this cross-matching. We gave it a name, CHIP, which was Customer Hub Information Portal. We embedded it in SalesLogix, which is their CRM. All this took a lot of time and a lot of effort. But they just weren't that interested. To them, SalesLogix is I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's like Salesforce, but some will say not as good. It's a complicated product. It takes a lot of maintenance on our part. It takes a lot of infrastructure to power it. Those guys think it's a great Rolodex to the salespeople, and it keeps track of who they should call. They use it in a very simplistic way. Let me just say that. They don't really see a need to learn all these other reasons to use it. It was just, like I say, it was a classic case of solution in search for a problem. And the key thing and go back to what Greg said, is the IT team understood the benefits, but we never really probed the salespeople. We would show them what we were doing. They're like, they're polite. That's great. Of course I'll use it. But the energy wasn't there. The interest wasn't there. They weren't. I think the key thing I should have noticed is no one asked me when it was going to be finished. They just were polite, and they're just not that IT engaged. And I can't make that. I can't force that. And so it just was. It was rough. It was not a great thing. The other thing worked fine. This didn't work. But you could tell that what I'm trying to paint a picture of people that we didn't communicate with. It didn't work well. We did communicate. It was a joint project. We both had skin in the game. That's when it worked well. So that's the kind of thing you should be thinking about. Now, just as an epilogue, I said earlier that Diversified is getting into business in these kinds of businesses. We have a conference. We have a couple of conferences that are quite a bit different from a marketing perspective than our trade shows. That we're getting the attendee or the member or whatever to drive the revenue. Those salespeople find this query tool very valuable. And they're also not that engaged, to be honest. I mean, they're as difficult as the exhibit salespeople. But the benefit was immediate. We have an event that, this may sound crazy, but it's for administrative professionals, executive assistants. and we get between 1,500 and 1,700 people a year paying $1,800 a piece to go to a 4-day event where they have keynotes and they have training and they have networking, and it's a great event that you may not think would be successful because you wonder who's going to send their admin. But someone's been an admin, well, I don't want to get into this, but they've been there 20 years. They've earned the right to go to this thing. So it does great. But there's 4 million admins in the country. We want 1,800. So we needed ways for them to query the data to find out who's a good prospect and who's not. Exhibits, like we have our exhibit universe. It's not growing, it's not changing that much. These guys, these salespeople, they weren't technically savvy, but they saw a benefit right away. And suddenly they were interested in technology. So that's another way to think about it. If, like I said before, that no one really asked me when it was done. The conference team really wants it done, and they want it done yesterday. And that's what's kept the project alive. And we've made some changes, we simplified it, we've tried to make it, we bought it, we wrote it ourselves, and when this team showed interest, we bought a tool that gives it a much easier interface. And it was expensive, but again, they saw the benefit. The revenue we thought was there, so we spent, $1,000 a seat to get a product called Cognos that's helping them, point and click to make their queries and get their lists. So stay tuned. I mean, this is sort of a new development, so I'm hoping it's going to work. So any questions on that tale of woe? And I think we have.
Just a couple minutes.
Okay.
We've got time for a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
I just wanted to kind of remark, first off, thank you. I appreciate your presentation. My role that I have in the company I'm at, I actually sit between the marketing and the IT people, product development. So I assume you've been wandering my halls because you were just dead on.
Yeah. I know, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time, I think, in group therapy between the two folks. But in the last year, I've had to write a lot of business requirements documents, and they're never fun to write.
Yeah.
But I've come to appreciate it. And I lean probably marketing more so than I do the IT group. And what I've come to realize is that one, you need to have a document written. And our document, by the way, is templated very much like your checklist, except we have some use cases that we throw in there. And kind of what I've come to appreciate over this last year is that, one, I think you need to write it down because it is almost like a contract or a statement of work between you and the IT.
Yeah.
And even though you don't think you need to write it down, things can get misunderstood if you don't. The other thing is that we're in an agile environment, and I think if you don't plan, it just makes it worse, not better. But by agile, we have 2-week sprints at $25,000 a pop. Well, if you stop and think about it from a marketing standpoint, you just want to write a paragraph and tell them to handle it, you're going away $25,000 per sprint. And I think people need to understand if that was your money, they would step back and take a little more time and write the document. And then I think finally, by writing the document, even as a marketer, you think you know what the problem is. The fact is, until you really write it down, you uncover a lot of things you weren't necessarily thinking about. So again, although I think marketers sometimes, you say flaky, I almost think it's almost like arrogance. They make the time
Yeah.
to just think of this. And so I just wanted to remark on that.
Yeah, those are good comments, and I totally agree that you need a requirements document. You have to do that as a statement of work, because you have to say, you didn't do this, you did do that. The point I was trying to drive home is it has to be an iterative process in creating it. Yes.
And it does, and it goes back
Right.
many times.
Too many
Many,
times.
many, many times. Right.
So one totally unrelated to that, that's a great comment, that next time we do this session, I think you may have to join the panel, given your experience there. Greg, you were talking about, sort of IT marketing. One thing that came up in the previous session was this tool called Optimizely.
Yeah.
Just for people that weren't in that session, one thing that I think helps is IT folks cannot enjoy doing little menial prep over and over and over again.
Right.
If you can take stupid things like simple A/B tests, and now the
And
Yeah.
it's also, it's true with content management systems, that if you can use one that, if you can become familiar with it, you don't have to go to IT every time you want to make a change. It's tremendous
Yeah, those
burden.
battles have already been fought. We've got WordPress, so whatever it is, you don't, there's no reason to be.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I think you have to have a marketing technologist on staff, somebody in marketing who can do basic HTML, update things in a CMS, look at basic problems, because IT doesn't want to be doing all these little things. If you submit something to them, change this word on this page, they don't want to do that stuff. They're programmers because they want to program. And to the extent that you can get that stuff out of their workflow and do it on the marketing side, absolutely you should do that.
So if people want to take questions, but I know the next session starts in 10 minutes, and I want to make sure people have time to move around. So if you're available, like as Dick and people want to keep asking questions, great, but at least I wanted to say thank you both, Greg and Bill.
Thanks. Sorry? Yeah. About 5 years. I've been around publishing for a long time. Yeah. I've been with Commander for 5 years, but I was with Thompson Publishing for like 20 years before that. Yeah. Thank you. No. Probably a different Thompson. I'm Thompson with a P, Thompson Publishing Group in Washington, D.C. It's a small regulatory publisher, not the big Thompson.
Oh, no, he was the big one. I hope I'm not the first in the town.
No. Yeah, I used to always say Thompson with a P, just to clarify. Although not everybody notices that it's a P in the name. Oh, well, great.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you.